I'm talking about how we can reduce the rate of which we generate CO2 by looking at how combustion and carbon cycle 2.0 can work together. My name is Robert Cheng. I'm a senior scientist from Environmental Energy Technologies Division. Been doing combustion research here at the lab since the year 1977, so it has been a long time. You have seen this in various different versions. No matter how we look at it, burning of fossil fuel will be a major source of our energy in the near future. I'm breaking this down into different energy and fuel sources, and the blue boxes are all relevant to combustion production. Even some of the renewables, for example, in transportation sector, actually involve combustion of biofuels. So 83% is what the US does, and other countries have different portions, but we can say that internationally, combustion still play a very major role in generating energy for us. So if we want to look at the near-term progress, what can we reduce carbon from is to doing some fuel switching. I think we heard a little bit about fuel switching. For example, avoiding burning coal directly and switching it to natural gas for power generation is a way of fuel switching. Also, there's a lot of opportunity to increase the efficiency of the combustion system to reduce the overall carbon footprint. And we heard a little bit about how we can do that yesterday from my colleagues from Energy and Environment Technology Division's presentations. In the long term, we can reduce carbon emissions from combustion by burning a lot more renewable fuels. And also, we need to develop new combustion systems so that they can be burned effectively. And of course, we have two talks previously on looking at how to capture and store the carbon. To me, combustion is not, the public is not very aware of what the importance of combustion play in their lives. And most of us know combustion from driving our cars. But if you look at this, there's a wide spectrum of technology involved in combustion in everyday life. For example, this is a power plant. This is a Mars Landing power plant down in the California coast. And most of the power generation is from coal, of course, and more is from gas turbines. And shown in the picture here is one of the largest natural gas turbines being manufactured. It generates about 400 megawatts of electric energy. I don't know if you can see the people here. So this is the size of this engine. And the combustors are these cans there, which is the size of your typical garbage can. So there's about 12 or 14 of them in these engines, depending on the size and the needs. So basically, these are land jet engines. So they're very connected with the jet engines that we use for propulsion for civil aviation and also military aviations. Now, look at the size difference. The largest jet engine that we use to power a 777 extended range is only about 22 megawatts. So these are much larger systems for stationary power generation. Land transport, the trucks are actually quite small compared to the stationary power generation systems. And they have very good, different performance requirements as well. For example, in the power plants, they need to operate it for close to 20,000 hours continuously before servicing. Whereas in the land vehicles, the lifetime of a land vehicle is only about 10,000 hours, and we can stop and start it on and off again. So as you can see, the technology, the combustion technology for different sectors require different kind of approaches. Now, turning to another major source of the stationary systems are these commercial industrial burners. You may not know this, but they generate a lot of the products that we use. These systems typically run from 1 to 30 megawatts, and the burner here, the combustor itself is about 6 feet in diameter. So they burn at atmospheric pressure. These systems burn at high pressure. So you can see that the size and the scalings of the combustion system are quite different. And then there's a little residential burner that we're very familiar with in our home. So how do we deal with the combustion research problems? Actually, the combustion is an integration of the multi-scale dynamics between the chemistry, thermodynamics, and fluid mechanics. On top of that is also the combustion mode. You may not be familiar with combustion mode. For example, a non-premixed flame is a Bunsen burner when you turn the air hole off. A partially premixed flame is when you turn the air hole on, and this is what you cook with, and this is what you heat your home with. Now, premixed flame is when you have exactly the amount of air needed to oxidize all the fuel. And that is basically an engineering development. It does not occur in nature. But that's what we are focusing on right now to apply premixed combustion to all our power and heating systems. On top of that is fluid mechanics. This is where I come in because I'm trained as a fluid mechanician in mechanical engineering. So I look at flame as a flow phenomena with reaction generating a lot of thermodynamics. So in the near term, we can, as I said, we can replace coal with natural gas. And another one that we did not touch upon today is coal gasification. The technologies that we've been hearing in the last hour or so is to capture carbon from the exhaust of the combustion. Those are called post-combustion capture. But there are technologies where you can capture the carbon in pre-combustion. Here is one example where you produce syngases. Basically, is a combination of hydrogen and CO. And then if you further separate out the CO and the CO2, then you can actually take the carbon out before you burn. So what you're left with is a stream of fuel that's mostly hydrogen. And vaporize of liquid fuels, we are doing it actually in our vehicles now because even though we put in liquid fuel in our car, when it actually burns, it is actually burning in a gaseous form. Fueling land vehicles with gaseous fuel, natural gas fuel vehicle, or fuel cells, charging electric cars, those are very good options in the near term. The challenges here is that we need to build fuel-flexible combustion system. What do you mean by fuel-flexible system is that you may not notice the furnaces in your home is very well calibrated to natural gas of a certain range of heat values. So even if we're using liquefied natural gases, there is a concern that your home furnace may not work. So this is a big challenge in the combustion community to develop what we call a fuel-flexible combustion system, and also to meet very stringent emission standards. The stationary systems are the most regulated system in the combustion arena. For example, many of the stationary systems are now required to emit less than 10 to 5 part per million of oxides of nitrogen. So those are very challenging problems. So we increase the firing temperature and decrease system losses is another way of reducing the carbon footprint. And again, the challenge here is to increase the efficiency without sacrificing emissions. So let's turn to combustion research and LBNL. The majority of the efforts is actually conducted by the chemists. In the chemical science division, we have a large group looking at the chemistry at the molecular scale. And at the ALS, they are using low-pressure flames and the soft X-ray probe to look at detailed chemistry inside the flame, and then develop chemical mechanism for flame model. Normally, in the combustion research community, there's an intermediate step to take the chemistry into a laminar flame model before going into the turbulent flame that we found in all the combustion systems. But because of the development of the supercomputer and high-power computing here, John Bell's group and I basically skipped that step by going directly from the numerical simulation, taking the chemistry, to simulating full-scale laboratory flames. And this is one of our first collaboration. And you may see a version of that as a logo of the Carbon 2.0 poster. Just want to make a point to you that this flame is stabilized by a 2-millimeter rod. The stabilizer for flame is very important because somehow you need to hold it down. Okay, that was the old paradigm. I'm going to switch to talk about the low swirl burner. the low-spark burner was discovered about 1991 when I was trying to find a robust burner to apply my laser studies. And because it's a very good laboratory burner and it stabilizes very lean flame, so I thought that may be a good use of it in practice. And there is, and there are many, many different applications as well. More importantly, because we were able to deduce how the burner operates, we were able to actually scale this from the laboratory size of about 5 kilowatt all the way to the very large gas turbines I was talking to you earlier by getting some scientific underpinning of how the burner operates. Right now, we have projects to put it in your home furnaces and water heater. It's already commercialized for industrial heaters. And we have projects on looking at burning digester gas, one of which I hope will be in the East Bay Mud water treatment plant right off the Bay Bridge. And also, we are developing it for the clean coal power plant. And additionally, we're working with some companies to look at how we can take the burner and combine with other technologies for the next generation systems. So this is a picture of a flame. As I said before, most burner needs to hold the flame down. Actually, this flame is floating. I have the burner here. Anybody can take a look afterwards. So when the movie plays, you see the flame jumps up and down. That is because of turbulence. Okay? But the flame actually remains in this position throughout all the velocity ranges. Right now, we're running at about 10 meters. But there are experiments to show that it can run all the way up to 130 meters. And all the chemistry actually takes part in the boundary between the bright and the not so bright area. So this is where all the chemical heat release occur. But for the pollution formation, actually the place is here. So heat release here, and the pollution formation is a little bit further downstream. So the important thing about our collaboration with the simulation group is that it helps us identify what are the important basic subjects that we need to study. And here we have a national lab, university, and industrial collaboration to look at how we take the burner for what we call high hydrogen fuel gas turbine and clean coal power plants. Most importantly, we need to look at these flames at high pressure. At LBNL, we can only look at it at atmospheric pressure. But taking these flames to high temperature, high pressure is non-trivial. Chemical kinetics of hydrogen and syngases, of course, this maps to the effort here in the laboratory in the chemistry area. The heat release model, which we're working with John Bell's group on, because as I said here, this is all we can get, some sort of like planar velocity at different heights of the flame. But they can give us a wealth of information if we'd be able to analyze the computational result the way that we analyze the experimental results. So what does Carbon 2.0 give us the opportunity? Heating, power, land, and aviation. So here we can look at biomass gasification and cleanup in the fuel treatment and generation area and across the board, generating biojet fuels, some of the gasification. Importantly is chemical kinetic transport of these new fuels. There's very little knowledge about how we can apply chemical kinetics to model these flames. Fluid mechanics, we have to look at stationary flames, such as the one that I showed you just now, and also what we call the transient flame. The IC engine is a good example because they don't burn continuously, they actually burn on a puff. So from the fluid mechanical standpoint, it's very different treatment altogether. Now, of course, the whole picture doesn't really rely on combustion alone. So of course, in one sector, we need fuel flexible burner. But the other thing is that when we look at gas turbine, we need to look at also the airfoils that we need for the compressor and also the turbines. And also advanced material. If we were to take the firing temperature up, then the materials have to be able to withstand the 1,000+ hour of operation without degrading. In the land and sea, for land, of course, battery is very important because we can switch from a petroleum fuel car to an electric fuel car. So we need to have all of this as the whole part of the equation. So in the long term, what can we do? We need to look at reciprocating engine and jet engine for biofuels. Our sister laboratory over in Sandia, in Livermore, has a very large group looking at reciprocating engine research, and we can certainly work with them on this. Near zero emissions coal power plant, this is what we're working on right now. Of course, we're looking at only the combustion part, and also, the two previous talk, that we have capabilities here to do the captures and storage. Fuel cells and gas turbine hybrid system, and on and on. So what I'm just going to leave you with is that as my own experience is concerned, I found that the new simulation capability here in the laboratory can be a game-changing possibility for us to look at new combustion systems. And with that, I close, and thank you very much for your attention.
All right, thank you for staying this late. I appreciate the fact that it's getting a little late, and I will try to keep you entertained for the last 15 or 20 minutes here. So my role is to try to talk about some of the roles that computation and computing sciences have in the last 3 talks that you've been listening to. And you've gotten a flavor for that already in the sense that there are a lot of computational methods that are being used. So I want to go into a few more details and just give you a sense of the kinds of things that I think are possible if you are able to form a collaboration between the different people in the domain sciences, mathematics, and computer science. So I'm going to start off as our point of reference, the Carbon Cycle 2.0 initiative, and this picture that we have here that outlines some of the various areas that we are interested in for this new lab initiative. And what I'd like to do is weave a story about the mathematics and the computer science that goes into, if not all, at least most of the ones that are going on in this initiative. So I'll start off by first talking a little bit about the computing science facility, because every time I talk to people at the lab, they always say, oh yeah, computing, that's about the big supercomputing center that you have. And in fact, that is a large part of what we do, but I'm going to tell a slightly different story. Now, to start off with, I'll tell you a little bit about the computing facilities that we have. So currently we have a computer which is depicted here, which has about 38,000 processors, or cores as we like to call them now, with a peak speed of about 356 teraflops per second. In the very near future, within a year or so, we're going to have a machine that will have 5,000 cores more, the phase 1 will be 5,000 cores. In the phase 2, we'll have on the order of a petaflop of a computing power per second. Now, what does that mean to the average user? Well, in 2011, we'll have on the order of about 1 billion CPU hours for people to use for their simulations, modeling, and so forth. In addition, we have some new money that came in this past year to hire postdocs to work on a new initiative called the Computational Science and Engineering Petascale Initiative, which is aimed at getting people hired on and working directly with people in domain sciences to take their codes so that they will be able to run on such a machine. So that's the computing facility. The story that I really want to tell, though, is the computational research one. And what I'd like to point out is that the big iron, the big computer is very necessary as a way of starting off. But if you don't have the people that understand the mathematics, the algorithms, and the computer implementations, then it really doesn't do you much good. And so what I'd like to do is talk a little bit about what the Computational Research Division does. And I've outlined here some projects that are already ongoing. And you'll see some of the ones that have already been alluded to by my colleagues in combustion processes, some global climate calculations that are going on, some renewable energy projects, some simulations in nanosystems, and then even power grid simulations. And what is common to all of these is that we're using the mathematics and the computer science to address very large-scale problems through collaborations with other domain scientists. So what I'd like to do now is jump into a couple of stories to highlight some of the activities and to give you a sense of what kinds of things are possible when you put these folks together. All right, so let me start off with combustion. That was the one that's freshest in your mind. And what I want to do is talk a little bit about the mathematics now that Robert was alluding to. So what's going on here? So when John Bell started working with Robert, and I believe it was 1996 or 97, Robert, roughly about 10 years ago, a little over 10 years ago, they started looking at these problems, and they saw a problem that looked very interesting, but by no means did they have the formulations or the codes to be able to do something that would be even remotely of interest to Robert, I'll have to say. Right? I mean, they were very, very large scale. Now, this is not to say anything about the codes themselves. Rather, that was the state of the art as it was at that point. And so what I like to point out, and the reason I like to tell this story is because it has all the components that I think are necessary for a successful collaboration. So let me tell you what the components are. So first off, what John and his group did is they looked at the mathematical formulation that was being used at that time and realized that in fact it was highly restrictive and it was really cramping the computational speed that could be attained. And it was because the formulation had everything in it. And what they did was they realized that parts of the math that was in the original equations really were not necessary. They're really unwanted. They got in the way, and they really restricted the time step that was necessary to be able to solve this problem accurately. So they did what most good mathematicians did, which is that if they don't like something and they can't really solve it very well, they got rid of it. And when they did that, they came up with this low Mach number formulation, which exploited the structure, got rid of the part that they didn't want, in this case the acoustic waves, which then allowed them to take much bigger time steps and allowed them to do something which was much more computationally feasible. In addition to that, they started using an adaptive mesh refinement technique. This is now the second component. So the first one was the math. The second part is the software available. So, and here I should probably backtrack a little bit and explain what adaptive mesh refinement technology is. And in very general terms, what I mean by that is that it is a formulation in which you are trying to solve a partial differential equation. But rather than gridding up the entire space, what you do is you notice that, for example, there's a lot of activity in very small regions, for example, right where the flame is, and probably not as much action going on outside of that region. So why not just grid up around the area where you believe the most interesting phenomena are and concentrate your computational work just on those areas there. So that involves a lot of software, a lot of trying to understand how you might adapt that mesh so that it goes where you think it should be. For us, it's easy. We just take a look at that and go say it should follow the flame there. But obviously on a computer, it's a little bit more complicated. So that's the second component. They use adaptive mesh refinement to then highlight and focus the computational work just on the areas where it's needed. The third thing is that because of the advance of computers, and in particular parallel, massively parallel computers, that we're able to take advantage of the parallel processing power to then get an extra factor of, I think, 4,000 to get a speed up. So when you put all of these things together, you now have a code that is running about 800,000 times faster than it was in 1996. All right, so that's an important enough number, I'll repeat it again. It's 800,000 times faster than it was in 1996. What that does then is it allows you to actually start thinking about looking at laboratory scale simulations. This is a little picture that's supposed to depict what was available or what you could do back in those days. And now you can actually take a look at a whole flame like a low swirl burner and take a look at the entire flame in the laboratory and be able to compare that against experiments. So the combination of the math, the software, and the computers gave you that kind of capability. So now you are able to simulate something that would be the equivalent of 8 billion cells if you were to do something naive like a uniform mesh. Okay? Now, what that simulation then allows you to do, and this is where I think the really exciting science starts to come into play, is that you can now capture the cellular structure of these turbulent lean hydrogen flames, premixed lean hydrogen flames. And so what you now start to do is you can actually start to analyze what's going on in the simulation to then feed back information to the experimentalists who then can come back and ask more pertinent questions. So a picture's worth 1,000 words. A movie's probably even more. So here's a simulation that John Bell and his group came up with. And what I'd like to point out is not so much the details here, but look at you can see the swirl coming in here. You can see the flame in here and the detail and the wrinkling of the flame itself from the simulations. You can see that out here where there's not a lot of action, you can see that there's not a lot of meshing going on, and so you are not doing a lot of computational work there. And so you can actually start to take a look at this and quantify now what is going on, and you can start to ask yourself questions about how a different design might affect the flame or why a particular flame is burning with a particular intensity. All right, so that's one success story. Let me switch gears now to carbon capture and sequestration because I want to tell you a short story on each one of the areas. And we've heard a lot about carbon capture and sequestration both from Bernd and Don. Let me tell you a little bit about what's going on here in terms of the computational aspects. So Bernd mentioned that one of the things that is very exciting is to try to be able to develop new, novel materials to do carbon capture. Carbon capture is very expensive. If you can come up with new materials that would allow you to cheaply capture the carbon, the CO2, it would be much more effective, and coal plants would be able to do it more effectively. The question, though, is that there are a lot of different proposed materials. Zeolites, for example, are one. I think Bernd also mentioned the metal organic frameworks. And the problem is that there are literally millions of these types of proposed materials, or hypothetical materials. The question is, which one should we really study? Now, if you remember, Bernd put up a slide that said he had a graph that showed the computation of the selectivity for CO2, and each point required, if I remember correctly, 2 weeks of simulation time to do one of those. So let's do a quick calculation. If there's 5 million molecules or structures in a particular database, and it's going to take you 2 weeks per calculation, so that's on the order of 10 million weeks, or it's roughly about, what's 168 hours in a week, roughly 1 billion to 2 billion hours of CPU time to do the entire database for that one particular, say, metal organic frameworks or zeolites or whatever. All right, so I mentioned earlier on that we're about to get a machine that's going to give me 1 billion hours per year. So if they would allow me to use that entire machine for 2 years, I'd be able to solve this problem. Chances are I'm not going to get that as much as Bernd wants that, or any other calculation like that. So the idea here then is, can we more intelligently screen those structures to find out the ones that might have the most possibility or the best selectivity? So how do we do that? Well, the idea here is that you try to take the molecules that you know that have already been synthesized and characterize them in some way. Here's one characterization in here. I'm not going to tell you just yet how we did that. But you then basically just follow the principle that the form should follow the function. And so what's going to happen is if you can find other structures in your database, which you can then cluster around this particular one, then you might say, okay, let's go and analyze those. And that might only be 100 out of those 5 million or something like that. Okay, 100 I can start to think about doing as analysis. Now, how are we doing this? Well, the idea is to use topological methods, and Bernd already mentioned that. Now, here I have to tell the standard joke. I don't know how many people know this or not, but the definition of a topologist, have people heard what a topologist is? Okay, so the definition of a topologist is somebody who can't tell the difference between a coffee cup and a donut. Okay, why? Well, because they both have one hole and they're continuous, you know. Well, I guess most coffee cups are like that, so if you have a handle on that. All right, so in a certain sense, that's bad because, you know, you really should know the difference between a donut and a coffee cup. Donuts are much more easy to chew on. But here it helps you because that's exactly what you're looking for. You're looking for structures that have that kind of similarity, and you don't really care about the particular details of what the atoms are to some extent. But what you're really looking for are things that are characterizing it at a more fundamental level. And it turns out you can do this with topological measures. And that's exactly what we've been doing in collaboration with Gunnar Carlson at Stanford, who's developed a program called MAPPER, which will take a set of structures and then come back with structures like this that have essentially categorized these or clustered these in a way that says all structures that look like that will be similar in some sense. Now, the tricky part here is you have to tell it what that similarity measure is, and that's where the domain scientist comes in and comes back and says, here are the kinds of things that I'm looking for. All right. Now, I'm not ready to report final results on this, although they're tantalizingly close. I wish I could show you this. We've actually come up with about 20 compounds that we think have very high selectivity, at least according to this MAPPER program. The question then is, we're in the process of running them through a simulation to see exactly what that simulation will predict in terms of selectivity. So hopefully in about 6 months, we should be able to actually show you those. Of course, the real test will be when they start synthesizing those and see if they actually agree with the predictions that we had. Okay, the second part of this project, and this again is with Barents, is that he mentioned these metal organic frameworks, and they're very porous, have a lot of structure inside. Then the question is, when these molecules go into these things, do they go in and can they come out? So there might be space in there for them, but if they can't turn the corner, so to speak, one way or the other, one particular molecule might be able to go through, whereas another one can't because it doesn't bend and it can't get through this little bend over here. So here we're using some methods from the fast marching method community, developed by Jamie Sethian, who's a professor in the math department down on campus. And he developed these a good 15 or 20 years ago, but we've been using them to good effect here. And in essence, they came out of a problem in robotic navigation where he was trying to develop a technique that would allow a robot to walk around a particular building and get around corners. And so it's the same kind of an analogy here. This molecule here wants to go in here, and we know that it can go around here, but you have to follow it through a particular path. This one can't because it won't bend. So you can do this automatically now with these new mathematical techniques. All right, very quickly on the geologic carbon sequestration part of it. Here, Don mentioned already the fact that there are a lot of issues having to do with trying to understand subsurface flow, characterization, trying to understand what happens when you pump the CO2 into the saline formations and you get these fingers and other types of bad things. And so what you're trying to do here is trying to understand what the flow of the materials are through the porous media. And here, the problem is that you have very complex geometries in the subsurface. You've got lots of different materials, fractal in some cases. And what you want to try to do is you want to try to essentially follow that CO2 through there through some sort of a solution of a partial differential equation. That's weird. Okay. And so what we're doing here is, again, using adaptive mesh refinements to try to understand how these different flows will go through these different reservoir structures. And what you can start to see here is that you can follow these fingers with time by using an adaptive mesh refinement that essentially just follows the flow of the fluid through here. Again, why are we doing this? Because if you were to try to do this with a standard uniform mesh or even a block-structured mesh, it would be very difficult because of the large size and the multi-scale nature of these types of problems. All right, here I wanted to just put a short plug-in for how some of the computation is also tied into the experimental facilities here. One of the reasons that we're interested in looking at these types of methods that in the previous slide is we can use another technique called embedded boundary methods, in which you can actually take these these methods, and you then take pictures or images from, say, a place like the ALS, and you can automatically generate from that image a grid that you can then use in a computational simulation. What's interesting about this is that if you do this, then you can start to understand some of the porous media. And I don't know if those things are still going around that Don had, but you want to try to understand how the pore structure here will affect the flow through the fluid, through the material. All right. Another aspect of CC, Carbon Cycle 2.0, is the solar photovoltaics. Here is a project that I worked on a couple of years ago. And here the idea is to try to understand if you can predict the electronic structure properties, electronic properties of a particular material for the purposes of trying to develop more efficient solar cell materials. And so one of the things that we looked at is to try to calculate what the electronic states were for a particular material, in this case zinc telluride, that was doped with a certain amount of oxygen. And it turns out, and some people had proposed that if you were to dope it at particular percentages, it would create an extra state, which you can just barely see over here, which would allow the electrons to jump from here to a middle state and then back up to here, increasing the efficiency of the solar cells. Well, the question here was, if you try to do this with these low percentages of oxygen, you need a very large supercell to be able to do the kinds of electronic structure calculations that you need to do. In this particular case, on the order of about 3,500 atoms. Now, the standard techniques for looking at electronic structure calculations in these types of problems require methods that are on the that are order n cubed, which is to say that the computational power grows, or the computational requirements needed to solve the problem grow as the cube of the size of the problem. So 400 to 500 atoms is not unthinkable. 3,500 atoms will take you a large amount of time to be able to solve that. And so what we did is we developed a new algorithm which uses a divide and conquer approach to split up this particular domain into a large number of smaller domains, which we then use a DFT calculation, a density functional theory calculation. And by doing that in a divide and conquer approach, what that does is it gives you a linearly scaling algorithm, which then allows you to solve problems with 3,500 atoms on the order of about 1 hour using, 17,000 cores, but that's doable. Whereas if you were to try to do this on a standard DFT calculation, it would have taken you closer to about 6 months to do. So this was a winner of the ACM Gordon Bell Award for Algorithm Innovation in 2008. Here's a summary of that particular algorithm. We were able to get 135 teraflops on the Franklin machine that I mentioned earlier in the talk, using close to the full machine, 37,000 processors. The good thing about this particular algorithm is that not only does it scale linearly, but it also has very high parallel efficiencies, and we were able to run it on up to 163,000 cores at the Argonne machine and close to 150,000 processors at the Cray machine at Oak Ridge. So we were able to get a peak speed of 442 teraflops, which was the second highest rating in that particular year. All right, so I've concentrated my activities here now on the carbon capture, carbon sequestration, and some of the combustion activities, because that's what today's activities were like. But I would be remiss if I didn't at least mention some of the other activities going on in the Computational Research Division, which I think would be very intimately linked to the Carbon Cycle 2.0 initiative. So there's work ongoing to try to understand extreme events. So here we have one of the staff, Michael Wayner, is looking at trying to understand what would happen in the event of the particular climate if it keeps going in the direction it's going. What would that say about extreme events like droughts, hurricanes, heat waves, and things like that? And he's come up with some rather interesting predictions which show, in essence, that there's going to be a lot more heat waves and less precipitation in most of the North American continent. There's also some activities that are just starting with trying to understand how to develop better tools for modeling building energy efficiency that Marianne talked about yesterday. And then there's a very new effort going on in trying to understand subsurface flow for environmental management, waste processing problems. But a lot of the same techniques that are being developed here would also be useful for carbon sequestration. Now, this one's a kind of a cool one. It's an ongoing. So renewable energy, we don't talk about much. But this is a problem that a professor here, Pearl Person on campus, is working with us here at LBL to try to understand how to develop better wind turbines. And so the problem here is very large wind turbines are very efficient, but they're also very hard to transport from place to place. And so what they're looking at is trying to develop smaller turbines which allow you to be able to move them from one place to the next. But when you do that, they're not as efficient as the larger turbines. And so the question is, can you predict the performance of a particular design and then try to compare them against other designs to see which one is the optimal one? What makes this problem so difficult is that you have very complex geometries. You can see it in the picture up there. And they're deformable domains, because as the blades go around, they change. And then, of course, you've got to follow all of the fluid flow and stuff like that. So it's a very difficult, very challenging problem, and he's been developing some new mathematical methods for trying to figure out how to solve those accurately. Okay, I'll just say one word about the building energy efficiency. This was mentioned very briefly yesterday. If you design a building and you get a LEED rating, how you design it and how it actually operates could be two totally different things. And the energy that you would use might be off by as much as 3 to 4 times what you predicted it would be. So here's one particular building where the design intent was to have 66%, and the actual measurement was around 44% of what they should have been. And so this graph here shows that, in essence, that it's the design intent here is that you should have this kind of energy efficiency, but then what happens is you can be off by as much as close to a factor of 3 here. So in this case, anything above here is the energy efficiency of the building is worse than it was designed for. So the problem here is that it's, one, you don't have the computational tools for being able to predict from first principles what the energy use of a building is. And then it's very difficult to understand and to quantify the uncertainty because there's so many different things that are going on between the time the building is designed and operated. And in particular, I think Marianne alluded to the fact that just having different occupancy behavior will have a large effect on the efficiency and the energy use. All right, and then my next to last slide is I want to also say that one of the things that is very important is that as we become more and more dependent on models, simulations, we're starting to generate a lot more data. So the one movie that I showed you, I don't even want to say how much time it took to produce, but there's a lot more data that's already been generated through those simulations, and we're trying to understand exactly how to analyze that in a very effective way. So one of the things that we're looking at very carefully is trying to then look at the data that's coming out and trying to understand how can we analyze that in a meaningful way to try to get the science out of it. So to wrap things up, one of the things I want to say here is that if this is a Carbon Cycle 2.0 initiative, then one of the things that I think of is if you think about computation covering that space, I've talked about ongoing efforts in combustion, carbon capture sequestration, climate modeling that we're doing, building efficiency, solar PV, and we had a nascent effort in energy storage that's still ongoing. So really, in terms of the kinds of activities within the initiative, computation plays a large role. The only ones that I don't see a very large role in right now is in the biofuels and artificial photosynthesis, but I think that's just a matter of time. Hopefully, we can convince those folks to start using more modeling and simulation. So I'll end with a quote from somebody that you probably recognize on the role of modeling and simulation. The supercomputer modeling and simulation are changing the face of science and engineering and sharpening America's competitive edge. I think, at least as I look around, there's a lot of opportunity for the computational research division to work outside and with other divisions. So I'm also using this talk as a way of encouraging anybody who might have some interesting problems to come to us. Be glad to work with anybody. Thank you very much.